It's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
Westbrook stops at the 1 and goes down to a knee.
Bitter labor dispute caused the cancellation of the playoffs.
You don't know when he's going to be back. 2 really serious concussions.
Hello, welcome back to How to Fantasy Sports. In today's video, we're going to take a look back at week 5 of the fantasy football season. A week that a lot of the big name players didn't really perform all that well. There weren't really a lot of great fantasy developments. So really, if you're still looking to improve your team at this point of the season, your best option for that is through trading. Now, we looked at trading already in week 4. So if you want to take a look back at our week 4 recap video to see how we feel you can best trade to improve your team, take a look at that video. Hopefully you're in a league that does encourage a lot of trading, as it's always a lot more fun being able to play with a lot of different players during the course of the season. And if you're in a league that does encourage a lot of trading, you can actually play players for really just a few weeks, try to invest in them when they're at a low point and sell them when they're at a high point, which can only benefit your team in the long run. Now, also on some of our previous videos, we talk about some of the players that we think that you should be buying into at a low point and selling at a high point. So take a look back at some of those videos, as we're not going to really recap some of those names now, rather introduce you to maybe a couple of new names that maybe you might want to consider selling or buying. So who are some of the players that we're looking at buying low right now? Well, they include Mike Wallace, a wide receiver from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had been performing okay, but coming off a poor week 5 and a bye week after week 4, some of his owners might be not as enthralled with his performance recently, so you might be able to pick him up at a little bit of a discount. In the quarterback position, we're looking at picking up Tony Romo, who hasn't really been performing all that well this year. He's currently producing below his career averages. So if you can go find his disgruntled owner, and if you're not starting one of the elite quarterbacks yourself, not suggesting Tony Romo's an elite quarterback, but he does have the opportunity to be performing at a much higher level than he currently is. So definitely worthy of investing low if you can get him at a good discount. And in the running back position, we like Darren McFadden. Now, we recognize that he is a little bit of an injury risk, but he has had a pretty inconsistent first few weeks of the NFL season, and it's possible that his team owner might be willing to let him go at a little bit of a discount. And a couple of running backs that have a pretty good remaining schedule include Willis McGahee and Donald Brown. 2 not so obvious names that you might not have to put up a lot of money for, but considering their remaining schedules, have a chance to put up a lot of points for the remaining part of the season. And now, who are the guys that we're looking at selling high? Well, we were never high on Cam Newton from the beginning of the year, and he's performed about where we would expect him to be, but he still carries a lot of name value in fantasy football. And even though he has struggled on the field for the last few games, he still put up pretty decent fantasy football points. So if you can find someone else who sees those high point totals and is willing to put up a lot in return for Cam Newton, we say make that trade. And in terms of running backs, we would definitely sell high on Frank Gore, who is still performing at a really high level, but hasn't shown the durability over the last few years to really play a full 16-game season. And they're just as likely to start mixing in some other running backs over the second half of the season to keep all their running backs fresh for the playoffs. And we're also looking at unloading Matt Forte. Now, Matt Forte is performing quite well. Just got back from injuries. He is a great running back, so you're not giving him away for a little bit here. You're going to try to get a lot in return for this guy. But starting in week 10, his schedule gets incredibly tough up through into the playoffs. And the likelihood of being able to return the same value that he's got right now is going to be quite difficult. So if you're in a position to unload him, he still has a couple of good weeks, good matchups remaining on his schedule. And he is a guy that can beat the matchups, but it's just not worth the risk if you can get a great running back in return for Matt Forte. And our final sell-high candidate is Stephen Ridley, a guy who's putting up a lot of points in fantasy football, so you should be able to get a lot in return for him. But his recent fumbling problems isn't going to endure him to the Bill Belichick offense over there, and so he's definitely not worth the risk to continue taking on for the remainder of the season. So next up, we'll take a look back at the significant injuries from Week 5, starting with RG3's concussions. Now, taking on his backup quarterback probably isn't worth all that while, especially it looks like that he might only miss a week most, maybe even being able to play in Week 6. But this is just a reminder that you cannot expose RG3 to this type of punishment. And so the coaching staff there in Washington will have to make adjustments to their play calling, as it's just not worthwhile to put their franchise quarterback in a position like that on a game-to-game basis. Other injuries that we're looking at, you've got Matt Castle. Now, we don't know if you were using Matt Castle in your league. If you are, you could probably add Brady Quinn as a suitable replacement for Matt Castle, depending on how long that he's out. But really, nobody wins in fantasy starting Brady Quinn at their quarterback position. In terms of running back injuries, you've got Cedric Benson, and we guess the ad there is probably Alex Green, but really what you're looking at is probably more of a committee approach to what Green Bay is going to do over there, and they were never that strong in the running game anyway, so it's probably not really worth your time to invest that heavily in one particular running back, as we think James Starks has just as much of a chance to be successful as Kuhn or Alex Green does in that Green Bay offense. And you've got Ryan Williams, who's now looks like he's out for the year, and that really leaves the Arizona Cardinals running game in shambles. Now, we guess the ad here is William Powell, but really he also came away from his Week 5 game with a little bit of a head injury, and while we still don't have any definitive news on that, he might not even be able to play in the next game. So if anything, this injury probably stands to benefit the Arizona Cardinals wide receivers the most, as they'll be the ones being thrown to more often, as they won't be able to rely on the running game as much. Our final injury update is with Jimmy Graham, and really the bye week couldn't have come at a better time for Jimmy Graham, who probably could have played this week, as he did even take some snaps even after injuring his ankle in Week 5, but it's probably just as best to get a couple weeks rest, and he should be just fine for Week 7. But if you want to try tempting a trade with any Jimmy Graham owner, just in case they get a little skittish, now is your time to acquire a pretty elite tight end for your team. And so who are the guys that we're looking to add from the waiver wire this week? Well, we're probably not that excited about many of the options on the waiver wire this week. There weren't that many standout performances, or at least performances that we think are repeatable. You can take a look back at some of our previous videos to see who we were pretty high on from previous weeks, and to see if there's any one of those guys that are still left on your waiver wire. In general, we hope that Rashard Mendenhall is still not available on your waiver wire. We can't imagine any league that didn't want to add him, as it looks like he is back in the Pittsburgh running back lead chair to carry carries for the remainder of the season there. And I guess you could add Bolden from the New England Patriots as the running back option there. We don't think he'll ever fully take over the running back position the way that Stephen Ridley had dominated carries through the first 5 games, but if it is a committee approach there, the New England Patriots have showed a pretty dominant running game for the first 5 weeks of the season. So if Bolden's still out there on your waiver wire, he could be a pretty attractive option for the remainder of this season. And as we talked about earlier, Alex Green, James Starks, and even William Powell from the Arizona Cardinals are good adds for your team right now, but we'd be a little bit wary about putting them in your starting lineup, depending on how deep the running back position is in your league. And so that's it for our look back at Week 5 of the fantasy football season. We hope you enjoyed this video and found some information that you found useful and can use to help improve your team. Otherwise, if you have any questions, send us an email at question@howtofantasysports.com or subscribe to this channel to stay in tune for future updates. Thanks for watching and good luck in week 6.